Hi, my name is Leela McCurry, and this is my Chapter 9 presentation on the conservative counter-revolution in the era of Reagan and G.H.W. Bush. Conservatism had been the popular ideology through much of the nation's history. However, liberalism had won over the country during uncertain times like the Great Depression in the 1960s and 70s. The economy had soared during the 50s and 60s, and many Americans believed that all they needed were politicians with good economic theory to continue the trend. America was believed to be an ever-expanding land of opportunity where everyone would be benefited. Not so shockingly, in the 1970s, a trend of inflation and unemployment deemed stagflation began plaguing the U.S. Lots of families were finding their paychecks providing less than before, as well as finding themselves in higher tax brackets. At this point, affirmative action also began to face resistance and backlash. Many Americans felt that minority groups were being unfairly and disproportionately benefited by affirmative action, even though that's sort of the point. After Liberal President Lyndon B. Johnson won against conservative nominee Goldwater, conservative legislators realized that they would need a much more aggressive campaign to defeat American liberalism. Conservative analysts began formulating radical propositions to cut social programs and other liberal policies, including but not limited to the licensing of professionals, traditional social welfare, and public housing. Conservatives also began to find support within religious groups who had formerly stayed out of politics, as well as in the Southern Baptist Church. Many Baptists believed that liberal policies to integrate schools were inherently secular and wanted tax breaks for the segregated schools that they chose to send their children to. Enter Ronald Reagan. A devoted follower of Roosevelt, Reagan had been pulled towards conservatism in the 50s as he became disenfranchised with the high taxes he paid due to his income as a movie star. He valued hard work and believed that people could pull themselves up by the bootstraps. It's also believed that he took personal offense to those who received assistance that his family did not qualify for because his father was an alcoholic. After defeat in the 1976 presidential election, Reagan realized that traditional negative policies would not benefit Republicans in the political arena. Traditional Keynesian economics, which had been used by Eisenhower, Nixon, and Ford, were under attack. It was at this time that Reagan discovered supply-side economics. You can pause the video here to check out this infographic of Keynesian theory. Supply-side economics basically proposed tax cuts to the wealthy so that they would use their newfound excess money to stimulate the economy by purchasing things such as houses, cars, and more. Reagan coupled this with massive cuts to social spending and smaller tax breaks for middle-class Americans. By playing on racial fears of white Americans and presenting himself as a man's man, Reagan won in a landslide in 1980. He immediately began raising military funding, a proposed $1.46 trillion on defense in 5 years, and cutting support for social programs. It's important to note, though, Reagan cut many programs that benefited low-income Americans while leaving programs that benefited the middle class untouched. In 1981, Reagan passed the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, or OBRA. OBRA cut funding to social services, community services, alcohol, drug abuse and mental health services, maternal and child health services, community development services, primary health services, and preventative health services. Along with OBRA, Reagan also helped pass the Economic Recovery Tax Act, which raised taxes in the lowest tax bracket by 2.2% and lowered the taxes of the highest tax bracket by 3.3%. Reagan also issued an executive order in 1981 which gave OMB the task of cutting federal funding for programs that were deemed unnecessary and cost ineffective. As a result, workers suffered. OSHA, the EEOC, and the Department of the Labor's Office of Contract Compliance Programs suffered huge budget cuts that severely impacted worker safety restrictions. Reagan's support waned when his administration split into two factions, who each wanted different economic policies. Reagan sided with the faction that favored tax increase, and Reagan passed the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, or TEFRA. Many began to wonder about Reagan's competency, considering his seeming inability to comprehend policy. This doubt also grew as the U.S. entered a major recession, worsened by the lack of safety net programs for those hit the hardest. However, the nation's economy improved, and the Democratic pick for the 1984 election was weak in the political climate. He was Carter's former vice president, thus allowing Reagan to win again. In his second term, Reagan continued to create deficits in the U.S. budget and refused to take accountability for the economic losses he had caused in his last term. Reagan's second term also brought the oppression of many groups, including women, children, the lowest class, and notably the LGBTQ+ population. During his second term, the United States was launched into the AIDS crisis, which Reagan refused to properly acknowledge. Those in the government who attempted to secure funds for AIDS research were often accused of supporting immoral lifestyles. The U.S. also continued to refuse proper education in school surrounding sex and diminished the utility of distributing condoms in schools. Overall, Reagan's 2 terms were disastrous for the lower class, as well as many minority groups throughout America. Here are my photo citations. Continued on to the next page, and my citation for our textbook.